Okay, so this is the Daf Yomi for September 17th, 2025. Excuse me, we're in Zevachim, Daf 3, Daf Gimel. So, it says, moreover, if a husband wrote a bill of divorce with which to divorce his wife but later reconsidered, and a resident of his town found him and said to him, my name is the same as your name, and my wife's name is the same as your wife's name, and we reside in the same town, give me the bill of divorce and I will use it. The bill of divorce is unfit for the second man to divorce his wife with it. Evidently, even if the bill of divorce was written to be used for divorce, if it was not written specifically for the given woman, it is not valid. So the Gemara responds, perhaps there it is different, as the bill of divorce was specifically designated for the sake of that man's divorce, and therefore it is not valid for the second man's divorce. But a bill of divorce that was written without specification might be valid if written for the sake of divorce, just flat out divorce, right? Rather, derive it from the subsequent clause in that Mishnah. Moreover, if he has two wives whose names are identical, and he wrote a bill of divorce to divorce the older one, and then reconsidered, he may not divorce the younger one with it. Evidently, a bill of divorce must be written specifically to divorce a specific wife. So the Gemara responds, perhaps there it is different, as the bill of divorce was specifically designated for the sake of the divorce of that other wife. Rather, derive it from the subsequent clause in that Mishnah. Moreover, if he said to the scribe, write a bill of divorce for one of my two wives who have identical names, and I will use it to divorce whichever one of them that I want. This bill of divorce is unfit to divorce either wife with it. Evidently, it must be written for the divorce of a specific woman. The Gemara responds, perhaps there it is different, as there is no retroactive designation. So the designation of the bill of divorce cannot be determined retroactively. It cannot be used for either wife because it was possibly written for the sake of the other wife. But a bill of divorce written without specification may be valid. Rather, derive from it that Mishnah, Gittin 26a, with regard to a scribe who writes the standard part of tofese, or bills of divorce, in advance, so that when one requests a bill of divorce, he will have to add only the details unique to the case. He must leave empty the place of the name of that man, and the place of the name of that woman, and the place of names of the witnesses, and the place of the date. And in addition, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, a scribe must also leave the place of the essential phrase, you are hereby permitted to marry any man, since it must be written for the sake of that specific woman. So evidently, a bill of divorce must be written for a specific husband and wife, and if not, it is not valid, even if it was written for the sake of divorce. Ravina continued to inform Rav Papa of Rava's statements. Rava further raises another contradiction. Did Rav Yehuda say that Rav says that a sin offering that one slaughtered for the sake of a burnt offering is unfit, whereas if one slaughtered the animal for the sake of consumption of non-sacred meat, it is fit? Apparently, only improper intent that is of its type, that is, for the sake of another offering, ruins the offering and renders it unfit, whereas wrong intent that is not for its type, for the sake of consumption of non-sacred meat, is disregarded and does not ruin it. And Rava raises a contradiction from the aforementioned Mishnah, so Gittin 24a. Any bill of divorce that was written not for the sake of the woman who is being divorced with it is not valid. And by inference, even if it was written for the sake of a Gentile woman, it is not valid. With regard to the matter of divorce, a Gentile woman is not the same type as a Jewish woman, as the halachot of bills of divorce are irrelevant to her. And Rava resolves the contradiction. If a bill of divorce is written for the sake of a Gentile woman, it is not valid, because if you remove the intent for the sake of a Gentile woman from it, it is considered to be without specification of the woman who is divorced with it. And a bill of divorce written without specification is not valid. But if sacrificial animals are slaughtered for the sake of the consumption of non-sacred meat, they remain fit, since if you remove the non-sacred intent from them, they are considered to be without specification, and offerings slaughtered without specification are fit. So, and Rava raised another contradiction. Did Rav Yehuda say that Rav says that a sin offering that one slaughters for the sake of a burnt offering is unfit, whereas if one slaughtered it for the sake of consumption of non-sacred meat, it is fit? Apparently, he holds that only improper intent that is of its type ruins it, whereas wrong intent that is not of its type does not ruin it. But isn't it taught in a Baraita? The Torah states with regard to ritually impure carcasses of creeping animals in every earthen vessel, and to whose interior any of them falls, anything that is in its interior shall be impure. Leviticus 11:33. From the word interior, it is derived that only food in its interior is rendered impure, but not any food that is in the interior of its interior. So that is in another vessel within the earthenware vessel. And this is the halacha not only if the inner vessel is an earthenware vessel, even if it is a metal or wooden vessel, which is purified through rinsing in a ritual bath, and is therefore susceptible to impurity from its exterior, it nevertheless protects the food that is inside it from being rendered impure. Evidently, even a vessel that is not the same type serves to nullify the status of the interior of an earthenware vessel. So just as a kind of like a refresher here, I don't remember exactly which tract. I think it was AvaTorah. I could be wrong. An earthenware vessel. So the earth, you can't make the earth impure. Like if you have an earthenware vessel, it only becomes impure when you put something inside of it, not from the outside. And it's different from the other things like metal or wood or whatever. If it becomes impure, you have to shatter it. Unlike metal, you have to pass it through the fire, or there's other materials where it can be purified. So earthenware vessels are different in that sense. Okay. And Rava resolves the contradiction as follows. A vessel purified through rinsing is actually considered the same type as an earthenware vessel, since they are both vessels. Concerning the halachot of impurity, the equivalent of intent with regard to the consumption of non-sacred meat is an item that is not a vessel at all. The sages render non-sacred meat with regard to sacrificial animals like a partition with regard to an earthenware oven. Just as a partition in an oven is not effective at all in preventing the transmission of impurity from one side to the other side, it is not a vessel. So too, slaughtering an offering for the consumption of non-sacred meat is not effective at all with regard to rendering sacrificial animals unfit. This is, as we learned in the Mishnah, Kalim 8:1. Excuse me. In the case of an oven that one divided with boards or with curtains, and the carcass of a creeping animal is found in one place, all the food in the oven, including that on the other side of the partition, is rendered impure. The Mishnah continues, in the case of a round barrel that is broken and plugged up with straw and lowered into the airspace of the oven, if the carcass of a creeping animal is inside the barrel, the oven is rendered impure. And if the carcass of a creeping animal is in the oven, the food that is inside the barrel is rendered impure. The broken barrel is not considered a vessel, and despite its being plugged up with straw, and therefore it does not prevent the transmission of impurity between the creeping animal and the oven. And Rabbi Eliezer deems the food in the barrel pure. The Mishnah continues, Rabbi Eliezer said, my opinion can be inferred a fortiori. So, or kal v'chomer. So, if a barrel or other partition between some item and a corpse under the same roof protects the item from becoming impure, even though impurity imparted by a corpse is severe in that it lasts 7 days, shouldn't a partition protect food in the airspace of an earthenware vessel from impurity imparted by the carcass of a creeping animal, which is mild by comparison? So the Mishnah continues, the rabbi said to him, your inference is not correct. If a partition protects an item from impurity imparted by a corpse, which is severe, this is only because such impurity is unique in that it is imparted to that which is in the same tent or under the same roof, and tents are divided by partitions. If so, should a partition protect food from impurity imparted in an earthenware vessel, which, although mild, is not divided by partitions like tents are? The Gemara notes, the comparison between non-sacred meat, vis-a-vis offerings, and a partition in an earthenware vessel works out well according to the opinion of the rabbis, meaning the majority, who hold that a partition does not prevent transmission of impurity inside an earthenware vessel, but according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who maintains that a partition is effective in an earthenware oven, what can be said? How is this compatible with the principle that an item is not affected by something not of its type? The Gemara responds, Rabbi Eliezer agrees with this principle, yet he says that a partition in an earthenware vessel is effective due to his kal v'chomer, a fortiori inference, which overrides the principle that an item is not affected by something not of its type. So the Gemara challenges, if that is so, then an a fortiori inference overrides this principle. Let us say an a fortiori inference there as well with regard to a sin offering that was slaughtered for the consumption of non-sacred meat. If slaughtering sacrificial animals for the sake of other sacrificial animals desecrates those sacrificial animals, all the more so is it not clear that slaughtering them for the consumption of non-sacred meat desecrates them. The Gemara responds, rather, the reasoning behind the statement of Rav that a sin offering slaughtered for the consumption of non-sacred meat is not in accordance with this principle at all, but it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. As Rabbi Elazar says, what is the reasoning behind the statement of Rav? The verse, quote, and they shall not desecrate the sacred items of the children of Israel, which they set apart unto the Lord, Leviticus 22:15, teaches that only improper intentions for the sake of sacred items or offerings desecrate sacred items, but not sacred intent does not desecrate sacred items. The Gemara notes, apparently an inference from a verse can come to rule out a conflicting kal v'chomer, or an a fortiori inference. If so, here too, with regard to a partition in an oven, let the verse, quote, in every earthenware vessel into whose interior any of them falls, end of quote. So let that verse come to rule out Rabbi Eliezer's a fortiori inference that a partition prevents food in an oven from becoming impure. So the Gemara responds, this expression, whose interior, does not indicate that a partition is ineffective, as it is necessary to teach another halacha, namely that food that one kneaded with clay, covering it from all sides and put in the airspace of an oven that had the carcass of a creeping animal in it is impure. Because it might enter your mind to say that since the food cannot become impure by touching an impure item, as the clay serves as an interposition, it also cannot become impure by being put in the airspace of an impure oven. So the phrase, in whose interior any of them falls, teaches us that the food does not contract impurity. So this is something that I think like Native Americans did and some other people did, where they would actually take food and they would encase it in clay and put it in a fire. So that's kind of like what that is, because it's like its own separate vessel. It's, and it kind of holds in the moisture and everything for what you're cooking, and so that's what they're talking about, is something of that matter. I think they would do that with fish. They would wrap it in grasses or something, and like wet grasses, and then cake clay over it and stuff like that, and they would cook the fish like that. Anyway, the Gemara asks, and as for the rabbis, or the majority, who apparently do interpret the verse as teaching that a partition is ineffective in preventing the contracted of impurity in an earthenware vessel, how do they derive that food covered with clay and placed in an impure oven is impure? The Gemara answers, these matters do not need a verse to teach them. Such food has the same status as any other food in an impure oven, and the halacha therefore is self-evident. So Rav Yosef Bar Ami raises a contradiction between Rav's statement and with regard to deviation with regard to the type of offering. So slaughtering for the sake of a different type of offering. And Rav's statement with regard to deviation with regard to the owner, slaughtering for the sake of someone else or someone other than the offering owners. And then he resolves the contradiction. The contradiction is as follows. Did Rav say that a sin offering that one slaughtered for the sake of another sin offering, that is, one that the owner is obligated to bring for a different transgression, is fit, but that if one slaughtered it for the sake of a different offering, it is unfit? Apparently, slaughtering an offering with an improper intention not of its type ruins it, whereas intent that is of its type does not ruin it. But doesn't Rav say that a sin offering that one slaughtered for a person who is not its owner, but who nevertheless is obligated to bring a sin offering, is unfit? Whereas if one slaughtered it for a person who is obligated to bring a burnt offering, it is fit. Apparently, an improper intention that is of its type ruins the offering, whereas intent not of its type does not ruin it. And he resolves the contradiction as follows. There, with regard to deviation from the type of offering, the merciful one states in the Torah, quote, and slaughter it for a sin offering, Leviticus 4:33. And here a sin offering was slaughtered for the sake of a sin offering, and therefore, although it was for the sake of a different sin offering, it remains fit, because it's the same type. Okay. Here, concerning deviation with regard to the owner, it is written in the Torah concerning a sin offering, and quote, and he shall be forgiven, Leviticus 4:26. Indicating that specifically he, the owner, but not another person, shall be forgiven. Therefore, if a sin offering is slaughtered for the sake of another person, it is unfit. The other person to whom this is referring is presumably similar to him, the owner of the sin offering, in that he is obligated to make atonement similar to that of the owner. Therefore, if the other person is obligated to bring a burnt offering and not a sin offering, this disqualification does not apply. So Rav Chaviva raised the contradiction between Rav's statement concerning deviation with regard to the owner and the aforementioned Braita concerning the interior of its interior. So that is a vessel placed in an earthenware vessel, and resolves the contradiction. The contradiction is as follows. But did Rav say that a sin offering that one slaughtered for a person other than its owner, but who is also obligated to bring a sin offering, is unfit? Whereas if one slaughtered it for a person obligated to bring a burnt offering, it is fit. Apparently, an improper intention that is of its type ruins it, whereas intent that is not of its type does not ruin it. But isn't it taught in a Braita that if the carcass of a creeping animal is found inside an earthenware vessel, the vessel's interior is rendered impure, but not the interior of its interior? And even a vessel purified through rinsing, if placed in the earthenware vessel, protects food inside it from contracting impurity. So evidently, impurity in the airspace of an earthenware vessel can be contained by something not of its type. So, meaning not of its type. So earthenware and like metal, right? Okay, so, and Rav Chaviva raises the contradiction as follows. The expression whose interior is written 4 times. In other words, in the verse, quote, in every earthen vessel into whose interior, or toho, any of them falls, anything that is in its interior, or toho, shall be impure. Leviticus 11:33. The word toho is mentioned twice. Each time the verse could have written the interior, since the possessive, it's the word it's, is added to each instance, the verse is interpreted exegetically as though the word interior, or toch, were mentioned 4 times. So, because it's referring to a pronoun. The word toch or toho is written twice. There's a possessive word that's written 2 times, or mentioned 2 times. So we add that up and we get 4. So interior toch, whose interior toho, and then interior toch, and it's an interior toho. There we go. So one of these is necessary to teach the matter itself, that an impure vessel, earthenware vessel, imparts impurity to food in its airspace. And the next instance, is used for a verbal analogy between the 2 instances of the word interior, from which it is derived that an earthenware vessel itself contracts impurity from impure items in its airspace. And then again, 1 indicates that the interior airspace of this, that is the earthenware vessel, renders food impure, but not the interior of another vessel, or another type of vessel, which imparts impurity only through contact. And the other instance indicates that its interior, but not the interior of its interior, imparts impurity, and that even a vessel purified through rinsing, if placed in the earthenware vessel, protects food inside it from becoming impure. So consequently, it is derived from a verse that inside an earthenware vessel, other vessels not of its type, meaning like metal or whatever, can block the transmission of impurity. Since this halacha is derived from a verse written in that context, there is no reason to assume that a similar halacha could apply to slaughter. And that is the end of Daf 3. Thanks for watching.